The news now on BBC One with Fiona Bruce.
The army in Egypt opened fire on supporters of the former government. At least 3 people are killed. The shootings happened after Friday prayers when angry crowds marched to demand the reinstatement of the former president.
President Morsi is still the president. Yes. I believe that in a very few hours or very few days, he will get back to his position. We are sticking together.
This is the scene live in Cairo's Tahrir Square. Protesters who campaigned to oust the president celebrate the intervention of the army. We'll be live from Cairo, where tensions are running high. Also tonight, the row between Labour and its biggest union backer escalates. Now Ed Miliband calls in the police. How after this car chase, an inquiry finds police shot dead a man with no lawful justification. As El Rodney was shot 6 times when police stopped him in North London back in 2005. And why people in the countryside will have to wait 2 years longer till 2017 to get super-fast broadband.
On BBC London, passengers are left in sweltering conditions following a failure in the new Routemaster's cooling system. And a court rules the Monty Python team has to share profits for this show with a former producer.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. 2 days after the army seized control in Egypt, soldiers have opened fire on supporters of the former government. At least 3 people are dead, several others are injured. Although the army has denied firing into the crowd, it was witnessed by a BBC crew. The shootings have increased fear that the political instability in Egypt may lead to fighting on the streets and further bloodshed. Our correspondent Quentin Somerville reports from Cairo.
At Friday prayers, they began with a plea for unity, a plea for Egypt, and then President Morsi's supporters started to march. "We are the people," they shouted, "down with military rule." On this man's chest, a single word: martyrdom.
Friday prayers have just finished and the mood here has changed dramatically. They're on their move in their thousands and they're demanding the return of their ousted president and the return of democracy to Egypt.
These are the Morsi faithful, passionate and furious. This was the crowd from just a single mosque.
No one will steal our freedom again.
What about President Morsi?
President Morsi is still the president. Yes. I believe that in a very few hours or very few days, he will get back to his position. We are sticking together.
But since early morning, the army had been getting into position. Parts of the city were locked down. Soon the two sides confronted each other. An army officer orders the unarmed protesters to get back. They refuse to move. hit me," shouts this man. First, there's firing into the air with automatic weapons. Then they fired directly at the protesters. There's chaos. A man is killed and others injured. The army then used tear gas. At the other side of town, it was a different scene. For those who wanted President Morsi to go, this is a reassuring sight. For them, the army is on their side. Sam and his father Yehia say Cairo is safer with troops on the street.
We need peace and safe to our country, that's all we need. And they are not safe anymore. That's why we need the army here everywhere.
But Cairo was a battleground today. The military's intervention in politics here has exposed, not healed, Egypt's deep inner conflict.
We can talk to Quentin Somerville live in Tahrir Square now in Cairo. Quentin, as we've seen there have been celebrations in the square behind you, but we saw what was happening with the pro-Mohamed Morsi supporters. The city appears to be split effectively into 2 factions.
That's right. Let's remember this was a military coup that worked like clockwork. It kept all these people very happy, but what it has exposed is the deep divisions within Egyptian society. It seems that those divisions are now being resolved on the street. The only hope for Egypt is that the political process can restart But as we've seen from the violence today on both sides, and these sides are very far apart, it seems very unlikely that we will see any kind of political solution immediately.
Quentin Somerville in Tahrir Square, thank you. The Labour leader, Ed Miliband, has dramatically escalated the row with his party's biggest financial backer, the Unite Union, by sending evidence of alleged vote rigging to the police. The crisis centres on the union's involvement in the selection of a Labour candidate for the Falkirk by-election. Unite's leader has accused Mr Miliband of smear tactics. And as our political correspondent Vicky Young reports, this is the biggest test so far of Mr Miliband's leadership.
The leader of the Labour Party and the head of the biggest union in the country. The bonds between their two organisations runs deep, but now they're embroiled in a bitter public fight that's testing Ed Miliband's leadership like never before. The bust-up stems from what's alleged to have happened here in Falkirk, where Labour's looking for a new candidate to stand at the next election. Unions often have a say in that, but in this case Ed Miliband's called in the police to investigate claims that there were serious irregularities in the way Unite signed up dozens of its own members to influence the selection process.
I am angry about this. I'm incredibly angry by what's happened, because I think certain people have let down this party, and I'm not going to let it happen.
These allegations first emerged in May. What do you say to critics who say you only acted after David Cameron knocked you around in the House of Commons?
No, at every stage we've acted thoroughly and decisively. In May, when complaints were raised, we suspended the process of selecting a parliamentary candidate. Then we conducted an inquiry. At all times, we have acted to uphold the integrity of my party, and that is what we will keep doing.
But Unite's leader at a rally in Manchester today insisted the union had done nothing wrong, and he accused Labour of deliberately picking a fight.
We disagree with what the Labour Party have done. We believe they've handled it absolutely amateurishly, and they've played into the Prime Minister and the coalition's hands, who must be rubbing their hands at this.
The fallout from Falkirk is a huge problem for Ed Miliband. He has to show that he won't be pushed around by Unite, but it exposes deep divisions in his party over the influence of the unions. And of course, Unite gave £3 million to Labour last year, so Ed Miliband is left trying to find a swift and painless way to end a full-scale row with his biggest financial backer. Labour MPs like Tom Watson want the party to have more working class members with links to the unions. Yesterday, he resigned as election coordinator, denying it had anything to do with Falkirk, but blaming colleagues for turning on him.
You know, I started to become the story. People were, there were clearly people that I kept sort of seeing in papers. There were unattributed shadow cabinet briefings, and I thought, well, if it's got to that point, let someone else do it.
Labour insists Falkirk is an isolated incident, but Ed Miliband knows the Conservatives will exploit his relationship with union bosses at every opportunity. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
A man who was shot dead by a police marksman in North London was killed without lawful justification, according to a damning report. Azelle Rodney was shot 6 times after police stopped his car 8 years ago. Today, his mother said police owed her an apology. The Metropolitan Police said they deeply regretted the death and that the case would be referred to the Crown Prosecution Service. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports.
2005, North London. Police have intelligence one gang is about to steal another's drugs. Armed officers are planning what they call a hard stop. Listen for the bangs. 8 shots fired by a police officer known only by his call sign E7. Azelle Rodney, in the back of the target car, was hit 6 times. He died on the pavement. Armed police officers have to be able to justify their use of force every shot, and today's report concludes E7s could not be lawfully justified. For Azelle Rodney's mother, today's findings are a turning point. She says they confirm her family's long campaign.
It seemed to me that Azelle was executed. The chairman's report, after detailed study of the evidence, is that he is sure and satisfied. He shares my view.
Before E7 pulled up alongside Rodney outside this pub, he'd been given intelligence there was a submachine gun in the car. In fact, there were 3 guns, and the police officer insisted that he saw Rodney reaching for one of them. That was tested during a reconstruction. E7 said he'd been able to see what Rodney was doing here before his car stopped. But today's report concludes he could only see at this point, when he waited just 0.06 of a second before firing as a preemptive measure. And he carried on firing, even though Rodney had collapsed into this position, unable to pose any threat. The inquiry also criticises poor planning and risk assessment before Rodney's car was stopped.
They were working split-second decisions, and I think if you could have had the benefit of hindsight, you make a different decision. But the point is, they had probably a sort of 10, 20 minutes or so as the car was going across London to find the right opportunity to stop it, and it wasn't ever going to be perfectly, it was never going to be perfectly easy to find the right situation.
The report describes Ezell Rodney as a mid-level career criminal. His family says regardless he deserved a fair trial. But now the officer who killed him may face charges instead. The case has been referred again to the Crown Prosecution Service. Tom Simons, BBC News, Mill Hill, North London.
Now, the plan was for the UK to have the best super-fast broadband network in Europe. 3 years ago, the government said 90% of homes in every local authority should have access to super-fast internet speeds by 2015. But a report out today says that target will be missed by 2 years. And despite promises of competition, only one company, BT, will run all the contracts. Our technology correspondent Rory Kethlin-Jones is in Redbourne in Hertfordshire. Rory.
Yes, it looks idyllic, doesn't it? But this is no rural backwater. This village is just 25 miles or so from London. It's just off the M1, but it is struggling, like many, to get into the broadband fast lane. It was only last week that local councils finally signed a deal with BT to get the public money to make that happen. But it's all way behind schedule, and in that, the whole pattern is being repeated right across the country. It was an ambitious plan, a promise to close the gap between town and country by making super-fast broadband available to 9 out of 10 homes across the UK. But now it's nearly 2 years behind schedule. The Cotswolds is just one area still waiting, and campaigners here say that puts country dwellers at a real disadvantage.
The service we get here is probably about 3.5 megabits per second, which isn't really enough for a whole family to operate on, let alone a business. And I run a business from home, as do thousands of other people in West Oxfordshire and around the country. So what we're trying to encourage is a service that can meet the needs of today, but also fix it for tomorrow, because I really don't want to have to come back and do the whole thing again in 10 years' time.
In 2010, the government made a broadband promise. By 2015, every area in the UK would get a super-fast service to at least 90% of homes. But today's report says less than a quarter of the local projects will hit that target. And even by 2017, 4 areas still won't have got there. And while the aim was to have competition, one company, BT, will now get every contract and over £1 billion in subsidy. And shouldn't you have actually... I put it to the minister in charge that the government hadn't kept its promise. This report says you failed.
I don't think the report says we've failed. It says it's been delayed, but I would dispute the length of the delay that the National Audit Office suggests. We've got a target of 90% superfast broadband. By the end of 2015, we'll have got to 88%.
Some communities have decided they can't wait and are getting on with building their own fast networks. The government insists the UK leads Europe in fast broadband. Plenty in the countryside find that hard to believe. And it's fair to say that overall Britain isn't doing too badly, with 2/3 of homes having access, if they want it, to superfast broadband. But that doesn't make it any better for those in the countryside still waiting. Fiona.
Rory, thanks very much.